Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's me, Rocco, again. Thank you, as always, for coming back to the channel. Really appreciate it. Today, I'm really excited, guys, because I'm going to be reviewing an album, a classic album, an album that really everyone seems to love, everyone that's heard this goddamn thing, and an album that was really instrumental in creating a genre of music, or even a subgenre, if you want to consider jazz fusion to be a subgenre of jazz and rock. That's right, guys. We're talking about Frank Zappa's 1969 masterpiece, Hot Rats. And Frank Zappa, guys, like, what can you say about the guy? Uh, I have a lot to say about him, and we'll get into that. But first, I have a confession to make, guys. This is, as of now, May 31st, 2020. This is the first and only Frank Zappa album I've ever heard in my life. And that includes the Mothers of Invention as well. And I bet you guys are wondering, how the fuck is that possible? I mean, this guy loves progressive rock. He loves jazz. He loves jazz fusion. He loves rock and metal and all that shit. How am I only getting into Frank Zappa? Well, the thing is, I've known about Frank Zappa for many years, probably about nine to 10 years, from when I started high school, getting into progressive rock at that time. And Frank Zappa's name kept popping up over and over again. I kept reading about how he's one of the most influential geniuses of music in the 21st century, a fantastic composer, counterculture icon, and satirist, whatever, however you want to pronounce it. And I was hyped about Frank Zappa. So, as I normally do with artists, I go back to their first album, their debut album, which in the case of Frank Zappa was while he was in the band The Mothers of Invention. But we all know that was really Frank Zappa kind of solo with a backing band. And I heard Freak Out, his debut album from 1966. And I went into it with an open mind. I was listening to a lot of Yes, a lot of Genesis. And I heard the first few tracks, and I could not get into it. It literally freaked me out. No pun intended. It was just weird, avant-garde. The music didn't grip me. The music actually seemed kind of simplistic, but just all over the place and weird. And the vocals were kind of the spoken word stuff. I didn't get the comedy. Again, I was into Tenacious D, that kind of stuff when it came to comedy rock. And I just didn't get it. It was kind of I thought it was overhyped. And then I think I went on YouTube and I heard a few other songs from that period, and maybe from the next album or the album after that, and it just didn't do it for me. So I'm like, okay, maybe I respect it, but it's just not for me. And then I went off into my progressive rock world and my metal world and discovered all those bands. And I kind of never really returned to Frank Zappa. I always had that kind of impression that he was just this weird artist that didn't really appeal to me. Until this year, that is. Or actually last year, me and my friend went to see Dream Theater. And we were talking about music, and he was saying, "Damn, Rocco, I'm getting into some Frank Zappa." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, I tried to listen. I heard a few of his songs back in the day. Didn't really, thought it was a little bit weird." He's like, "Oh yeah, what did you hear?" And I told him I heard a few songs on Freak Out. And he's like, "Oh yeah, you know what? The Mothers of Invention stuff is kind of weird, and it doesn't really do it for me either. But what you got to listen to is his jazz fusion stuff, like Hot Rats, fucking the Grand Wazoo, Waka Jawaka." And he was listing all these albums. One size fits all. And I'm like, oh shit, I didn't know Frank Zappa did jazz. And then little did I know, I went to Wikipedia and I saw all the fucking albums this guy made. And holy shit, he is probably the most prolific artist of the 21st century. And at that moment, I realized how much of an idiot I was, that I just really scratched the surface and I didn't give him a proper chance. But it was okay because, I like enjoying artists and really delving into them. And if I missed out on a fantastic artist in the past, I have the comfort of knowing that I have the rest of my life to get into that artist at my own pace, because really, if you discover all the good shit early on, you got nothing to look forward to. So one day we set some time aside. This was a few months ago now, and he showed me Hot Rats, and I was instantly blown away. I thought it was just fucking incredible, and I was kicking myself in the head thinking, why didn't I get into this guy earlier? But again, I don't really sweat it these days. And it just blew me away. The album was just so bright, colorful. The jam sessions were absolutely mind-blowing, and usually jam sessions bore me. I'm really critical of jams in songs being like overlong and things like that, and doesn't really do it for me. But on this album, holy shit, guys, the jamming is out of this world. Every single millisecond is enjoyable and has purpose. The guitar solos are incredible, just so melodic and even blistering at points. And the whole the sax, the trombone, the flutes, all those wind instruments giving it that jazzy flair. It was incredible. And the compositions as well. A lot of these songs, well, some of them at least, have these amazing arrangements, proving that Frank Zappa was not only a master of jam sessions, but a master of arranging and composing, and it honestly swept me off my feet. The album cover is just sinister and so engrossing and enthralling, and I fell in love with it. And I've been blasting this thing ever since. And honestly, I can't wait to listen to more Frank Zappa albums. So leave some recommendations down below, because I have a feeling this guy's gonna end up being one of my all-time favorite artists, because this album here is incredible. And I know this album here is considered his most accessible and his easiest to get into, so I'm not ruling out the fact that I might not like the other albums, but I have a feeling I will. So yeah, that's kind of like my backstory with Frank Zappa. So I'm going to give you guys my honest opinion, my overall review of the album. But first, let's dive into the history behind it, because I find it so interesting. So let's talk about that. Now, I'm not going to sit here, guys, and pretend to be an expert on Frank Zappa history. Again, this is all very new to me. I'm still kind of learning as I go along. But from what I did read about Frank Zappa, he is just one of the most interesting figures in music, to say the least. Such an interesting guy. I mean, he may be the most interesting man in the world. If you guys remember those Dos Equis commercials, man, fucking Frank Zappa should have been in that place. But yeah, very interesting stuff. And I was just so intrigued to find out that up to this point, 1969, Frank Zappa had just done so much. He just lived such an interesting life. And, all of that, I think, culminated onto the making of Hot Rats, because this one here is a real milestone in his career, a huge stepping stone to what he would do in the future. And but what came behind was just as important as well. Obviously, Frank Zappa, he was in the Mothers of Invention, which was this kind of weird, avant-garde, satirical band that came out in, I believe, 65 or 66. It was led by Frank Zappa. He was the main composer, and he really ran the show. But even before that, I mean, this guy was doing film scores, albeit for kind of low-budget films, and that's really what was keeping him afloat, keeping the band afloat, all the royalties from these film scores he did. And he just lived such an interesting life, even going all the way back to high school. I mean, when everyone else was listening to rock and roll and R&B and things, Frank Zappa, sure, he was listening to that stuff as well, but he was also listening to classical avant-garde music and jazz and all these weird, disparate influences, even Egyptian music, for God's sake. And he really channeled that, because I believe in his last year of high school, he was writing these weird avant-garde pieces for his school's orchestral band to play. So really, Frank Zappa, he had just done so much up to this point. And again, a very interesting album, Hot Rats, coming out in 1969. This was the first album that Frank Zappa would do after he decided to split up the Mothers of Invention. And I bet you guys are wondering, why would he split up the Mothers of Invention? I mean, that band, they were doing pretty well for themselves. They were huge in the counterculture movement with their satire and their weird music that really spoke to a lot of the underground music listeners at the time. And really what it came down to was Frank Zappa. He was kind of, the major reason, I think, is because he was kind of sick of the band holding him back. Zappa was a workaholic. He always was. He would spend hours and hours in the studio, like sometimes like 12, 15 hours a day, just working on his music. And he expected everything. He expected the same out of his band members. And these guys here, to say the least, they weren't virtuosos. And they weren't as involved with the music as Frank Zappa was, to the point of obsession. And it was kind of holding him back. And again, as well, they weren't virtuosos. And Frank Zappa, at this point, he was a musical genius. I mean, his capabilities on his instrument were incredible, and he didn't really have an outlet to prove that, because he knew that he was miles ahead of the rest of his band. And but up to this point, he didn't really showcase his true instrumental talents, and he needed the backup musicians to really allow him to flourish and allow him to really show everything that he had pent up inside. So he basically split up the Mothers of Invention after a few albums, and at this point, they were getting a little bit more experimental, and Frank Zappa was trying to introduce a little bit more jazz, a little bit more classical into the compositions. And the band just weren't really up to snuff. They weren't able to let Zappa really shine and display his influences for the audiences. So really stifling Frank Zappa's creativity. And you could even tell that this was going on years before, because in 1968 or 67, Frank Zappa actually released his a solo album called Lumpy Gravy, which was this long-ass, I believe, orchestral composition, very avant-garde and music concrete and all that shit. And he did that during the Mothers of Invention. So yeah, like he was really struggling to get his creativity across. And although the Mothers of Invention were a very creative band, again, from what I've heard, I'm not a huge fan of it. It's a little too strange to say the least, and the music doesn't thrill me. But they were again just stifling Zappa. Now, one thing he wanted to keep after dissolving the Mothers of Invention was Ian Underwood, who was the only member of the band who Zappa knew he could rely on. And fuck, that's saying the least, because on this album here, Ian Underwood is like the secret fucking weapon. I mean, this guy is just an all-around multi-instrumentalist, musical genius that just adds so much to the album. And I really think that Zappa went in the right direction by dissolving the Mothers of Invention and letting all of these amazing influences shine through. Now, understandably, after Zappa dissolved the Mothers of Invention, the band members were pretty pissed off. They kind of resented him for it, and they never really let it go. But really, I think it was the right move for Zappa to do because, again, if you look at these guys, what they did after the Mothers of Invention, some of the members went on to do some interesting things, but nothing earth-shattering like what Frank Zappa would end up doing. So he pretty much dismissed the rest of the band, but there was one notable exception. He kept one member of the Mothers to collaborate with him on this album. The mastermind, Ian Underwood. Holy fuck, guys. This guy here is a musical genius, and Zappa knew that he was really the only member of the Mothers that can really help him propel his career forward. And that's, saying the least. I mean, that's underestimating his value because not only did Ian Underwood stand above the rest of the Mothers of Invention, he was almost an equal to Frank Zappa on this album. And I know that might be controversial, but I think that his contributions to this thing are equally important to Zappa, if not more important. And he's just a fantastic multi-instrumentalist. I mean, just look at what he does on this album. He plays organ, saxophone, piano, clarinet, just so many different instruments. And really, needless to say, he shows a mastery of each of these instruments. And it's just plainly obvious when you listen to the music that this man here is an absolute master. So Frank Zappa definitely made a good choice by keeping him on. But basically, he had to set out to find his backing band, the band that could really help him realize his true potential. And there's some pretty big names on this album. Jean-Luc Ponty on the violin, although he doesn't really play. There's this one track later on the album where there's this huge-ass violin solo, and for the longest time I thought that was Jean-Luc Ponty because he's such a big name in the rock/jazz violin playing world. But no, it's actually a different violinist. So Jean-Luc Ponty appears on the next song, It Must Be a Camel. But the one that really shines on this album is, let me just get his name right here. We got Don Sugarcane Harris. And he is just really steals the show with his violin playing. And apparently, I was watching a documentary, and apparently Frank Zappa had to bail this guy out of jail to perform on this album because he was well known in the R&B and blues world for his violin playing. And Zappa was he was a pretty big blues and R&B fan, and he had to have him. So he goes out on a quest to find this guy and finds out he's in jail for some reason, and he had to end up bailing him out, which I find hilarious. So 2 violin players on this album. We get some pretty awesome bass players. Max Bennett doing most of the bass work on here, but also Shuggy Otis, a 15-year-old for God's sakes. He plays bass on Peaches and Regalia, the first track, and apparently he was the son of a famous musician, which would explain why he was in the music scene at 15 years old. But I just find that incredible. 2 drummers. We got John Guerin and Paul Humphreys, both doing a fantastic job here. And hopefully I'm not missing anyone. I think that's it. And then obviously Zappa on guitar. That's one thing I should have mentioned earlier on. Zappa, he started off as a drummer, but later on picked up the guitar. And up to this point, the music of the Mothers of Invention had been pretty pretty heavy on the vocals and arrangements and things like that. And Frank Zappa couldn't really shine and make a name for himself on guitar, but he would definitely change that with this album, putting forward some of the greatest, most perfectly arranged guitar solos that you're ever going to hear in your life, and proving that he is a true guitar god. So yeah, Frank Zappa on guitar, and no vocals. He doesn't do any vocals on this album. Funny enough, now that I think about it, I did forget one member. We got Captain Beefheart contributing vocals to the track Willie the Pimp, which is the only track on this album that has vocals, and just delivers a great performance. And Captain Beefheart, you guys might know him for his album Trout Mask Replica, which I don't get it. Honestly, I don't want to go off on a tangent. I don't get the album. People say it's a hidden masterpiece. I don't like it. But he was a good friend of Frank Zappa's, going all the way back to high school, and they would really collaborate a lot throughout their careers. So we got Captain Beefheart delivering a comedic vocal performance on Willie the Pimp. So I guess he was the final piece of the puzzle. And yeah, Zappa doesn't contribute any vocals to the album whatsoever. So that's kind of unique. So we got his band together. They went into the studio. And boy, did they make waves when they entered that studio, guys. I mean, the making of this album was just innovative on every single level. Now, musically and thematically, this album here was just one of a kind. Again, coming out in 1969, this album here appeared at the very beginning, almost the prehistory of jazz fusion, because on this album here, Frank Zappa really took all of his influences, classical, jazz, R&B, rock, and crafted a perfect amalgamation of those styles, really creating what I consider to be one of the first jazz fusion albums, which would later go on to be one of the greatest genres. It incorporates everything you know and love from jazz, instruments like the saxophone and the whole improvisational kind of jamming nature of jazz, which is really at its core, and a lot of the rock rhythm section, and the rock and guitar solos, and also a lot of blues and a lot of R&B as well, and just combine that perfectly. And in contrast to the other major early jazz fusion albums like Miles Davis, In a Silent Way, and Bitches Brew, which actually came out a bit after this, which are fantastic, and I love those albums. But this one here really sounds like a rock musician playing jazz, and those albums sound like jazz musicians playing rock, or at least fusing it together. So if you want a more rockin', more easily accessible jazz fusion album, this is where I would start, and then later on I'd go on to Miles Davis, Bitches Brew, and In a Silent Way, which again are incredible albums. I love them, but this one here is much more accessible. And so yeah, really innovative, and again, the wide variety, the cast and crew on this album really contribute to its strength. But not only was it innovative in terms of really giving birth to a genre of music, but the recording techniques on this album were incredible. I was interested to find that Frank Zappa pioneered so many recording techniques that we take for granted. I mean, this guy here, he really is the mother of fucking invention, because they basically invented, or I don't know if he invented it or probably his engineer, they invented the 16-track recorder, which basically allows you to record double the amount of instruments playing at the same time, creating this huge big band, orchestral, larger-than-life kind of feel on the album, with many instruments playing at the same time. And it's incredible, because most of these instruments are being played by Ian Underwood, and they're just layered and cut and pasted together. It gives it this effect that, Frank Zappa's playing with this huge backup band, but really it's just Ian Underwood and then, a bassist, a drummer, and maybe the odd violin player here and there, which appears on two of the main songs on the album. So that was really innovative. Also, they multi-track the drumming, which is really cool because sorry, let's just check my notes for a second, which is really cool because you can really hone in on different aspects of the drums at different times, which, you couldn't really do that back then. Back then, it was just basically recording the sound of a drum. Here, you can really, emphasize certain aspects and certain playing of the drumming. And again, sorry if that's a bad explanation. I'm not a musician, but that's my understanding of it. And there's all kinds of tape effects going on the album. A lot of the instruments are really wound up or sped up, creating these weird, playful sound effects, which I guess really isn't anything new. The Beatles were doing that shit back in the day, but the mothers of invention as well in the mid-'60s were really pioneering that stuff as well. So just a really innovative album. Frank Zappa just let loose, and the album did very well, actually. It really made a name for Zappa among serious music aficionados rather than just the counterculture scene. And really, this album here, the music just speaks for itself. I mean, again, it was easy for those counterculture teenagers and people at the time to get into the Mothers of Invention because it was rebellious, it was satirical, it was just out there. This one here is just a fantastic listen for any music fan of any genre, honestly, especially jazz and rock. It's just, anyone can get into this album. It's so accessible, and it's just really a testament to the innovation of jazz fusion, what makes that genre so fantastic. And I'm so excited to get into the other jazz fusion albums he did, like the Grand Wazoo and One Size Fits All and Waka Jawaka. I can't wait for that stuff. So yeah, very successful album. And yeah, Frank Zappa would continue in this direction. I don't know what else to say about the history. It's just very, very interesting. Again, Ian Underwood would be a longtime Zappa collaborator. as well as Captain Beefheart, but I don't believe he really kept many of the other members of this band for long, like Shuggy Otis and John Luke Ponty. But they really struck gold with this one, guys. And one thing I want to mention is also the iconic album art. I mean, come on, guys. That is just an incredible album cover. It's got this infrared, kind of weird, psychedelic vibe, and this ominous figure just kind of crawling out of a pool. And also the title, Hot Rats, is just kind of bizarre and out there. Really, looking at the album cover and hearing the title of the album gives you the impression this is going to be some weird psychedelic experience. But it isn't. It's just this awesome masterpiece of instrumental music. But you still gotta love the album cover, even though it doesn't really fit in with the theme of the music. It's beautiful to look at, and kind of reminds me of Sabbath's debut. The album cover of that with the kind of infrared kind of background. But anyway, now let's go into the overall review. Alright guys, so I already said a lot about the general music behind this album, so I'm going to try to keep it short and trimmed. But you know me, I go off on tangents. But I just really want to highlight a few things about this album. First of all, I just want to address that this album here is widely regarded to be the most accessible Zappa album, in the sense that you really don't have to be into his other stuff. You don't really have to have a penchant for satire or avant-garde music to really appreciate this album. And I completely agree with that. Again, I haven't heard much of his other stuff after this album, but this one here, I can't imagine anyone not liking this album. I mean, it's just instantaneous. And so that's the first thing I want to mention. So if you're just getting into Zappa, even though I haven't heard all the other stuff, I agree with that. This is probably the starting point to get into him. And even if you don't like the other Zappa stuff, at least you have this gem to keep coming back to. Because again, I've been playing this over and over again. It's just so replayable. And that's one thing about the album. When you read reviews, a lot of people are going to say, oh, you know what, if you're not into long instrumental jams, you're not going to like this album. And normally, again, I'm not a huge fan of long instrumental jams. When I listen to the Allman Brothers, you know, I love certain ones like Whipping Post and Memory of Elizabeth Reed, and I'm singling out the Allman Brothers because they really like to get into their long extended jams. Even Zeppelin in their later years, they started really expanding songs like No Quarter to about 30, 40 minutes and stuff. And usually that bores me. I really like when the song just changes and maintains a nice, tight, composed structure. Again, there are many exceptions. Like in the jazz world, it's all about improv. So that rule does not apply to jazz or jazz fusion. But normally I don't really like jam sessions, but this album here is different, guys. Although 3 of the tracks on this album have very long, lengthy instrumental jams, either violin, fantastic legendary solos by Zappa, or even saxophone at some points, they never feel boring, and they always have this catchy melodic nature to it, where you could actually remember the jam session after it ends. A lot of times, jam sessions just wander off in different directions. They never revisit the same themes, but the jams on this album definitely keep within this tight kind of framework, really with the keep staying true to the whole theme of the song, the overall feel. And it does wander off into different directions, but there's a lot of reprises, and it just stays in the pocket. It stays in the zone, keeping the jam sessions really fresh. And they're always intense, they're always upbeat, never boring. So that's one thing I love about the album. When it does get into those long ass instrumental jams, and I call them jams rather than improv sections, because they really do stay true to the main theme of the track and don't really wander off into weird territory. It's amazing, and it holds your attention throughout. So this album gets major points for that. But again, you read reviews, and it makes you think that this album is all about the jams. I think this album struck the perfect balance between the jamming and the tight compositions, and really shows that Frank Zappa was a master composer. I mean, listen to tracks like Peaches and Regalia, Little Umbrellas, and It Must Be a Camel. Those 3 tracks there have some of the most intricate and just honestly amazing arrangements ever. I mean, they go off into all kinds of different directions and themes and everything, but it's so tightly arranged, and it's just perfect, and it shows that Zappa really was devouring all that classical music with the tight compositions. So, and even on songs with some long jams, like for example, Son of Mr.Green Genes, the main themes of those tracks are freaking legendary. So don't let the reviews fool you. There are a lot of lengthy jam sessions, but the compositions are tight and very classical inspired in that sense. So definitely showing Zappa's talent as a composer. And yeah, the overall sound of this album, I mean, what can you say? It's just so energetic, it's so upbeat, it's so playful and quirky at times. You could tell these guys weren't really taking themselves too seriously. And a lot of this, the jam sessions get really intense as well. I mean, you feel this music at your core, and the rocking rhythm section is there with these awesome, intense, driving solos, which are just amazing. Not one kind of low point on the entire album. Yeah, it's just really barnstorming from start to finish. And again, they struck that perfect balance. In terms of the instrumentation, what can you say, guys? Ian Underwood is a mastermind. He's playing trombone. He's playing sax. There's an amazing sax solo. Keyboards, organ, flute, all this stuff multi-track, giving it this big band feel. Again, a lot of these songs with their triumphant brass sections really harken back to that old big band jazz style that, from the 50s or even the 40s, in my opinion. Just some incredible playing by Ian Underwood. And Frank Zappa, again, this is the album where he really burst through. The first time he's really going off into the stratosphere with these insane solos, especially on the song Willie the Pimp, which is basically just a Frank Zappa guitar god showcase. And again, just like his compositions, his solos just feel so composed, and they repeat motifs throughout, and they're always building and climbing, and just incredible guitar solos from the guy. What else can you say about it? The violin playing adds a nice touch of color here and there. I love when bands add violin. Again, I'm more used to the American fiddle style of violin whenever it's incorporated into music, or the classical sound. I'm just recently getting into jazz violin, but it really, really fits the music and adds a lot of color. And again, I mentioned that there's a track, 12-minute track called the Gumbo Variations, which is a fantastic song title, by the way. That's just really a violin masterclass. I mean, Don Sugarcane Harris, just phenomenal on that track as well. So it's just such a great album. And again, it just feels like a mini symphony on every single song, especially Peaches and Regalia, which is like, at first, it's one of the shorter tracks on the album. It didn't stand out to me, but after repeated listens, it's now become one of my all-time favorite instrumentals. It's just so bright and sunny and amazingly arranged. You gotta love that. Playful, energetic, lively, whatever other words you can use to describe it, I can't think of. But yeah, fantastic album. And again, so easy to get into. I just want to mention that the album I listened to had the 12-minute version of the Gumbo Variations. Apparently, the remastered edition has a 16-minute version, which I still have to check out. But I do find that the 12-minute version is like the perfect length for me, so who knows what that extra 4 minutes is going to add. Just thought I'd mention that. So anyway, guys, now let's look at this album track by track. Kickstarting off the album, we get an absolute masterpiece. Probably my favorite song on the album. Again, that's hard to say, but I really think it is the best. The 3.5-minute excellent song, Peaches and Regalia. This song is just mind-blowing to say the least. If it doesn't blow your mind on the first listen, give it a couple more and it'll sink in. It is one of the catchiest, most complexly arranged musical masterpieces I've ever heard in my life. And again, this track here, not a jam session in sight. This is just one of the tightest, most strictly structured tracks on the album, and just proof that Frank Zappa is an absolute compositional genius. I mean, if the guy did nothing else, if this was his only contribution to music, he would still be considered a genius, because this is just modern day classical jazz, just mastery. It's incredible, and it's such a joy to listen to. It's just so melodic and catchy and quirky, and there's so much going on, so many instruments. And again, Ian Underwood, this guy is just playing so many different things on this track. He's playing the grand organ, flute, clarinet, saxophone, all kinds of wind instruments. It's honestly ridiculous. And fuck, guys, the bass playing, I just want to mention this now, the bass playing by Shuggie Otis, 15 years old, just driving this track. It's absolutely incredible. And yeah, overall, guys, this song here is just a whole symphony just crammed into 3.5 minutes. It's just honestly a masterpiece, and it flows just magnificently. Some of the greatest transitions I've ever heard in my life, and it just maintains this just joyous atmosphere throughout. And on this song here, Zappa is employing all the studio techniques he developed. The 16 tracking, the speeding up of the bass, making it sound like this kind of high-pitched, weird sound, and he called it the octave bass, I believe. I don't know, I'm no musician, so I don't know if that's just a Frank Zappa-ism, or if that thing's actually considered an octave bass, I have no idea. Again, the manipulation of the drum tracking to kind of accentuate certain points on the drumming, it's just ridiculous, and it all just flows together. Let's just walk through the highlights here, guys. Again, you could read like an entire analysis of this song. I've seen it online, like literally like a 3-page long analysis. That's how significant this track is, and it's gone down as a classical standard. I mean, this is a song that a lot of aspiring musicians hold in the highest regard, or a lot of seasoned musicians actually as well. But a lot of people really try to learn this song as kind of a proof of their worth as a musician, to say the least. But yeah, guys, starts off with this awesome kind of rolling Caribbean drum-like intro, and then all of a sudden, bam, the main theme of the track, which is just so triumphant, comes in on the piano, and there's this weird kind of effect on the piano, kind of gives it this rumbling quality to it. Heard nothing like it before in my life, just so unique. And then all of a sudden we get the keys, some other keys coming in, and it almost has this kind of fuzzy kazoo sounding quality to it. Again, very like childlike and playful. And then we get, before you know, we get these toy sounding horns. Like it sounds like a little miniature marching band with the it's just so complicated, but again, so playful and childish with the high-pitched kind of toy-like quirky vibe to it. Absolutely incredible. Then we get my favorite part of the song, where Frank Zappa comes in with this awesome guitar part, and we get flute in the background, and the whole song kind of switches themes to this oriental sounding, kind of like traditional Chinese sounding thing, driven by Frank Zappa's guitar, which sounds nothing like a guitar. It sounds kind of like this, weird oriental instrument. And then before we know it, again, probably another one of my favorite sections, the horns come in, and I don't know if it's just Ian Underwood playing like 10 saxophones at the same time or something, but obviously it was layered on, but it just absolutely bursts, and it's just so triumphant, gives you goosebumps every time when the fucking wall of horns comes in. Ah, man. We even get a medieval sounding kind of kazoo section before breaking back into the main theme, reprised on the wind instruments, and oh man, it has this grandiose epic ending. And I think you guys are probably thinking, damn, this guy's going overkill right now. It's a 3.5-minute song, and he's already been talking longer than the song itself. I could talk about this song for hours, guys. It's that amazing. It's that cohesive. There's so much going on, and yeah, it's just and it's funny because the first time I heard this song, I didn't really consider it one of the best songs on the album. Like, those jam sessions really drew me in at first, but with repeated listens, the true genius of this song has revealed itself to me, and it's just an all-time great. And again, Frank Zappa used this to open or close a lot of his shows, so that's just a testament to how great it is. His son Dweezil Zappa won a fucking Grammy kind of re-performing the song or reworking it. I don't know. It's just, man, Peaches and Regalia, kind of like the theme song of Frank Zappa. It really feels like a soundtrack, like a movie going through your mind when you listen to it. A really happy, really playful movie. I can't give this anything else but a 10 out of 10. It's just flawless. Now, track number 2, Willie the Pimp. Fuck, guys, this song just blows me away every single time I hear it. And usually for long guitar-driven jam sessions like this, usually like the first 2 listens, it really stands out. And then after that, it really fades with time. You don't really go back to it much because it's just really a guitar workout. Not this track. I wish this track never ended. It's just such a fantastic song. And really the Frank Zappa guitar highlight of the album. It's basically an 8-minute Frank Zappa guitar solo. But I think it's so much more than that. It's a fucking experience. I mean, every single time I listen to this song, I just sit there with my mouth open like this. Just completely hypnotized, in a complete trance. And it's rare for music to do that to me, but once in a while a song or an album comes along that just leaves me in a complete fucking state of an altered state of consciousness. And this song is definitely one of those. Again, it's just one of those jam sessions that just feels so composed, so structured. And yet, that's what it is. It is a jam session. It really is just Frank Zappa going nuts on the guitar. But, oh man, there's just so much more to it than that. You guys just gotta listen to it. I just love the way it starts off. Again, this song here, out of all the songs in the album, probably has the least in common with jazz fusion. I'd say this is probably just a straight up, I don't know, blues / classic rock guitar-driven track. Doesn't really have many jazzy moments, but it's fantastic nonetheless. Love how it starts off with Don Sugarcane Harris's iconic violin riff. I mean, I absolutely love the riff on this track on the violin. If you could even call a violin thing a riff, I don't even know. But it just has this swanky, sleazy kind of swagger to it, which is awesome. And then Captain Beefheart comes in with the only vocals on the album, and they're jagged, they're brutish, they're kind of jarring and quirky at the same time, and really bluesy at the same time too. So at first, this is going to be kind of jarring. I thought it kind of ruined the song the very first time I heard it, but with multiple listens, it just adds to the quirky nature of the track, and it really fits in well with the sleazy kind of vibe that Don Sugarcane Harris is setting up with that violin. And then we get Frank Zappa coming in and out with this wah-wah guitar, and that's just really the start to Frank Zappa's guitar extravaganza. And it's just hypnotic. The rhythm in the background, the bass playing is just incredible, and it just creates this kind of hypnotic groove that goes throughout the entire 9.5 minutes of the track. And there's some weird percussion in there as well, some weird maracas and I don't know, just strange percussion going through, but again, fitting the track. Then we get Captain Beefheart. There's this one section where he's just yelling over Frank Zappa's amazing guitar playing, and it's really weird and eccentric, but I freaking love it. And I think we're at about the 2 minute mark at this point, and this is where the violin cuts out, and really the song just develops into one of the greatest guitar solos of all time. Frank Zappa's wah-wah guitar solo, or if you want to call it that. It's just, again, it's so hypnotic. You just lock into the groove and you get so into it. I mean, the solo is so fluid, and it never feels like an improv. It always feels like the solo has direction to it. It has purpose. There's climaxes throughout. There's this one section that gets me every single time. You know the part I'm talking about, the that part there. I think it's at around the 5 minute mark. It's kind of like the climax of the whole solo. And again, it's just so cohesive, and it locks into that underlying groove. So really not a free-form improv jazz session or improv section that you would expect from jazz. This is something completely different. And man, let me tell you guys, never have I wanted an 8 minute guitar solo to last longer. I mean, that's just a testament to Zappa's guitar playing and his compositional skills. But it eventually does come to an end. Again, after so many climaxes, and right when you think it's going to burst at the seams, it just keeps going. And then it does come to an end, and the violin comes back in with that original riff, but played at a much faster tempo, and then the song pretty much ends shortly after that. Oh, man, guys, I freaking love Willie the Pimp, everything about it. I want to give it a 10 out of 10, but I'm going to stick to a 9.5, but some days I feel a 10 out of 10. It's another masterpiece. Right, guys, so earlier on in the review, I mentioned that Peaches and Regalia was my favorite song on the album. I might have gotten a little bit ahead of myself there, guys. I really do think Son of Mr.Green Genes is not only one of the best Frank Zappa songs, not only the best song on the album. Again, almost like tied with Peaches and Regalia, it's just longer, so I'll give this one the edge. But yeah, not only one of the best Frank Zappa songs, but this is one of the best songs I ever heard in my life. And I don't say that lightly. It's just a masterpiece. It's like you got Peaches and Regalia and Willie the Pimp and just fucking fuse those fucking tracks together into one solid gold masterpiece. This song here just has all of the tight arrangements of Peaches and Regalia, all the jamminess of Willie the Pimp. That's the word, the jamminess. And it brings back a lot of the jazz elements, a lot of the classical elements, and again, the uplifting nature of Peaches and Regalia, and just basically glues it all together. Incredible song. The first 2 to 3 minutes, very reminiscent of Peaches and Regalia. It starts out with this fast-paced drum beat, and then this fucking wall of flutes and clarinets and trumpets come in with this absolutely, again, this triumphant, like proclamatory, I don't even know if that's a word, kind of main theme of the track, which is just epic, and it just all these flourishes and climaxes and repeats for a second time, and it's bright, colorful, melodic, and it just, it's amazing. And then it dives into a blistering Frank Zappa guitar solo with this awesome groove in the background. Again, very similar to Willie the Pimp. And then the horns come back in, and it's just this beautiful amalgamation of everything that made Willie the Pimp great and everything that made Peaches and Regalia fantastic. And Oh man, we even get this really high pitched kind of piano solo coming in. Definitely did some studio trickery to get that sound, and it's just fluttering and it's beautiful. And then Frank Zappa's melodic playing comes on in the background, and then we get into this really jazzy big band section with the horns and the trombones, and then we get a lot of these high pitched Frank Zappa guitar effects breaking through after that big band swinging section. Oh man, it's just so layered. You got so much going on. The trombone, the guitar solos. It's just candy for the ears, absolute candy. Then we get into the meat of the song, which again, like Willie the Pimp, is this fantastic guitar solo. And this one here might actually rival Willie the Pimp because honestly, guys, this solo climaxes so many times. And you think it's going to end, you think it's going to go back to the main theme, but it keeps going, it keeps progressing, keeps getting more and more intense and climactic. And it does this about 4 or 5 times, and it's an absolute treat. This is like an all-you-can-eat buffet for the ears. You know, right when you had your fill, right when you think you've had enough, it just keeps going and going and going, and in the best possible way. Like you don't want it to end. It never feels like it's getting stale, or you feel like, okay, Zappa, let's wrap it up a bit here. Never feels like that, which is really the key to Frank Zappa's genius. And it's like the guy had unlimited fucking stamina playing this thing, and man, it even speeds up at one section, and then this another swinging section comes in at the end of the guitar solo. Again, very reminiscent of big band jazz. I wasn't kidding when I said this was a jazz fusion album. And the solo keeps going even after that, and oh man, finally heads back into the main theme of the track, like 8 minutes in, and this is a 9 minute track. So really, the meat and potatoes of this thing is driven by Zappa. And again, just like Peaches and Regalia, I can go on all day. It's just exhausting because of just how much there is to this amazing song. So yeah, Son of Mr. Green Genes, just you guessed it, it gets a 10 out of 10. I wouldn't be able to sleep at night giving it a 9.5 out of 10. It's a solid 10. And just a little side note, the reason it's called Son of Mr. Green Genes is because he had a previous track with the Mothers called Mr. Green Genes, and this is like kind of like the instrumental reworking of it, but I can't imagine the original being any better than this. I mean, this is just the epitome of music for me, and it's just intricate. It's an absolutely intricate song combining the horns and the jamming guitar section. So really the best of both worlds, and really the song that represents the album the most. So again, absolute genius song. So after all that, guys, we still have another whole side of music to get into. And the first track, once you flip the album over, is a little song called Little Umbrellas. And I really love this one, guys. Just like Peaches and Regalia, it's one of the more composed compositions on the album. One of the more tightly arranged. Doesn't really wander off into any jam sections. But it's a really good one, guys. It starts off with this awesome upright bass playing that continues throughout the entire song, giving it that very traditional acoustic jazz feel that was kind of missing on the first few tracks. And then we got Ian Underwood coming in with the main theme of the track on I believe it's on the clarinet. It could also be the sax. I think it's the clarinet. But it has this nice smooth waltzy kind of back alley dark kind of feel at first, and very jazz influenced, like classical traditional jazz influence, like big band style. And it's really great. The bass is just pounding in the background. But then the song kind of like picks up the pace. We get the organ cutting through, and it dives into this middle section, which is dominated by the piano and organ playing. And even we get some like happy, playful flute coming in later on. And it evolves from this kind of dark back alley feel into this more upbeat, joyous kind of nature, kind of like Peaches and Regalia. But so tightly composed, so perfectly arranged. And then finally, when the main theme comes back in, we get the flutes and the trombones, giving it that extra kind of weight that the intro didn't really have, ending the song off with a fantastic kind of larger than life feel. So yeah, Little Umbrellas, just this beautiful oasis of traditional jazz in the middle of this crazy album, and an incredible song. Gotta give a big thumbs up for the bass playing, really driving the song with that upright bass. And Ian Underwood really doing all the heavy lifting with the melodies on this track. Frank Zappa, I don't really think makes an appearance on this song, maybe somewhere in the background, but overall this is like an Ian Underwood highlight. So Little Umbrellas, I would give it as high as a 9 out of 10. Uh, if I had to pick a least favorite song on the album, it would be this one, but that has nothing to do with the quality of the track. It's just that all the other songs are just so fucking amazing. So yeah, that's Little Umbrellas. Coming up next, we get the centerpiece of side two and really its main attraction, the almost 13-minute long Gumbo Variations. And I already mentioned earlier on that my version of the album has the 13-minute one. There's also a 16-minute version out there, so if you guys want to hunt that one down, I think it's on the remastered edition or something. Definitely check it out. Again, I haven't heard it yet because I feel that the 13-minute version is just so perfectly timed. But I definitely should get on that. So maybe after this review, I'll check it out. But yeah, the Gumbo Variations. This track here is another one of the more jammy ones on the album. Kind of like Willie the Pimp. But although there are some fantastic Frank Zappa guitar moments, the instruments that really shine on this track are the excellent saxophone playing by Ian Underwood and the lengthy, epic violin solo by Don Sugarcane Harris. I mean, wow. This is just one of the greatest violin solos I ever heard in my life. And just like Willie the Pimp, you don't want it to end. So maybe an extra 3 minutes of that violin solo wouldn't kill me if I checked out the 16-minute version. But it's such an incredible song, such a funky one, such a groovy one. Again, the rhythm section, I got to give these guys a shout out, really holding down the entire track and allowing these fantastic soloists to just burst over the rest of the song. So fantastic rhythm section there. And, I love how this song kind of pulls a fast one on you. You think this song is going to be completely sax dominated. Then at the 4-minute mark, when that violin kicks in, it completely changes and the violin really steals the show. But Ian Underwood's sax playing at the beginning is absolutely phenomenal. It's like one of the best sax solos I ever heard in my life. And again, it's so funky. It has so much punch and bite to it. And I believe it's the tenor saxophone, either the tenor or the alto. The more lower pitched saxophones for all music people out there, correct me if I'm wrong. But yeah, great solo. And I love how the song just starts off with this energetic burst of guitar and horns, and it just locks into this funky groove. Of course, the sax takes center stage here, playing a lengthy 4-minute solo. If you think about it, the main violin solo is about 5 minutes, and with the sax solo being about 4 minutes in length or 3 minutes, it kind of competes for the amount of time it occupies the song, now that I think about it. But yeah, the sax is definitely a main component of this thing. And at some points, the guitar stops, and it's just really sax, bass, and drums just going absolutely nuts. And I love it. It has this very American, New Orleans kind of quality to it. Like, it just sounds larger than life. And it actually gets pretty freeform, pretty avant-garde. I mentioned that a lot of, like, the jam sections on this album kind of really lock in with the overall theme of the song. But this one here, Ian Underwood's really letting loose on the sax. So if you're not a fan of like freeform sax solos, this might kind of be a down point for you on the album. But for me, I absolutely love it. Then at the 4-minute mark, oh my God, guys, Don Sugarcane Harris comes in with his amazing violin solo. And this guy is just possessed. His violin solo on this song just builds and builds and builds and just climaxes so many times. Just like Zappa's solo on Willie the Pimp. And it feels like a man possessed. He's just playing his heart out on this song. And Frank Zappa's doing a fantastic job in the background, kind of, melding in with the rhythm section, playing these kind of chugging riffs in the background. And again, it's so fluid and it never feels overlong. The grooves are absolutely funky and it's just excellent. Then I think at around the 8-minute, 50-second mark, the violin's still going, but then Frank Zappa cuts through the mix and the violin soon stops, and we get a fantastic 1-minute guitar solo by Zappa. Again, it just leaves you wanting more. It's an incredible solo, and it actually gets through some pretty climactic moments as well. I mean, I mentioned the guitar wasn't really a highlight of the song, but damn, this solo is really making a statement. Then the soloing stops at the 10-minute mark, and then we kick into this amazing bass and drum groove. I love how the grooves just subtly change in this track, and the violin comes back in. And it gets pretty crazy. I mean, the violin section here just builds and builds, and it can get pretty dissonant at points. That might turn a few people off, but it's so climactic, and you're literally sitting on the edge of your seat. It builds up to the point where the violin just reaches this pitch, this ear-shattering kind of, I don't know, brain-splitting pitch, and it just maintains that pitch for about 1 minute, and it just leaves you feeling this like sense of tension. And you don't really know how it's going to resolve. And then finally, it can only resolve by coming to a crash. And the song kind of ends with this weird, dissonant, like 1-minute freak out section at the end. But, oh man, absolutely incredible. And he even, I don't know if I mentioned this, but you even get some cool organ playing in the middle of the song during that violin solo, or maybe a little bit after. Can't remember when it happens, but that's also pretty nice. So yeah, the Gumbo Variations, just this mammoth song, just so funky, really intense with the violin playing, and the sax solo will please all the freeform jazz aficionados. So this song here, 9.5 out of 10 easily. One of the best songs on side 2. And finally, guys, closing out the album, we get another one of the shorter tracks on the album. It Must Be a Camel, which is 5 minutes long. And this song here is just one of the most indescribable tracks on the entire album. I mean, I have heard this song so many fucking times, and I still can't pin down the essence of this thing. And it's strange because it's one of the more composed, one of the more arranged songs, kind of like Peaches and Regalia, Little Umbrellas. Like, it does have a structure to it, but the individual sections within that grand structure are just almost indescribable. There's so much going on. This track here really makes use of the 16 track with the multi-layering of the instruments, all the weird tape effects and intricate soundscapes going on here. And it has this kind of disjointed feel. Like, there's a lot of different things happening at the same time that don't really gel together. So again, kind of similar to some of the future jazz fusion albums to come out, like Bitches Brew by Miles Davis, and things like that, where it really takes multiple listens to let the song absorb. And because there's so much happening at the same time. Like, for example, in the middle of the track, you get this weird piano section with this really deep kind of quality to it. I don't know what gives the piano this deepness to it. But then you also have Frank Zappa kind of just soloing in the background with this disjointed guitar solo, and it just sounds all over the place. But and again, on first listen or even second or third listen, it might sound just like a bunch of random shit happening at the same time. But the more you listen to it, it sinks in, and you start to really know what's coming up next in the song, and that's really when you start knowing that a song is weeding itself into your brain, when you know what's going to happen next on the track. But yeah, just a really weird, jazzy, intricate song. Very, very intricate. This one, again, more similar to the jazz fusion albums to come, with all the weird experimentation. But it's an awesome sound. And again, there's a main theme on this track that gets repeated twice. It's just this really triumphant sounding kind of clarinet and trombone kind of motif with the and it really builds up with Jean-Luc Ponty's violin playing in the background. And again, this is the one song with Jean-Luc Ponty playing violin rather than Don Sugarcane Harris. And I'll never forget when I listened to this album with my friend, when the song was over, I was saying like, oh, I didn't really hear any violin. And he told me Jean-Luc Ponty's been playing the entire time. And I guess that's a testament to, the complexity of the song, or how if you focus on one thing, you might lose focus on another thing. But yeah, I really think Jean-Luc Ponty really comes in during those two main sections of the song where it goes into what I consider the main theme. And the middle of the track, the meat and potatoes, he's kind of just, at most, just in the background. But again, that's just my opinion. But yeah, really cool song. And again, the drumming sounds really cool. At the beginning, it opens with this weird kind of sparse drum and piano intro where the drums sound really toy-like with those tape effects on the drums. But yeah, it's so cool. The sax comes in later on. It's just a really hard song to describe. You just got to really go out and listen to it and just gain an appreciation for it. And when all is said and done, I think I'd give this song a pretty strong 9 to a 9.5 out of 10, somewhere in that range. So yeah, on any other album, this might have been the highlight, but on Hot Rats, a freaking masterpiece with so many classics. This is probably ranks among my, right next to Little Umbrellas is my least favorite on the album. But again, you have to take that with a grain of salt, because on any other album, this would have been like one of the greatest songs ever. So yeah, It Must Be a Camel is definitely a classic. Again, a little bit harder to get into, so take your time. And that closes out Hot Rats, guys. Holy shit, guys, what a freaking masterpiece. I mean, Son of Mr.Green Genes and Peaches and Regalia alone are just some of the greatest instrumentals of all time. But throw in Willie the Pimp, one of the most fantastic guitar solos. The Gumbo Variations, violin excellence, and the saxophone craziness. And then the honestly batshit crazy It Must Be a Camel. Little Umbrellas. You got one of the greatest albums of all time. This is a classic. Everyone has to listen to this. Just one of the most perfect albums these years I've ever heard in my life, and I can't believe it took me this long to get into it. Just what are you guys waiting for? Just go out and get it if you haven't already heard it. I'm probably the last person on earth that hasn't heard this album, by the way, so I'm kind of preaching to the choir here, but it's just mind-blowing. So thank you guys for watching. I think that's all I got to say about Hot Rats. Definitely stay tuned for more Frank Zappa reviews in the future. Can't guarantee when that'll be. It just depends on, what I'm in the mood for, what I'm into at the time. But they're coming because I can't just leave it at this. I got to fully explore this guy's discography. So comment below which one should I check out next. Preferably something similar to Hot Rats, just to, get my feet wet and everything. But any suggestion is welcome. So thanks again for watching, guys. Peace out and rock on.